Five young Labour activists, all of whom voted for Jeremy Corbyn and backed the grassroots revival, talk about the party, their politics and why they joined. But after a summer of rows over Brexit and antisemitism, is their support for their leader and would-be Prime Minister still solid? Jo Dillon, 23, Yorkshire Jo Dillon is hooked by the party's consistent swerve to the left. Photographed Gary Calton for The Observer. It was the former Labour leader Ed Miliband's 2013 conference speech that inspired Dillon, then 18, to join the party, but it is the consistent swerve back to the left, to what the party first stood for, that has the founder of Skipton young Labour hooked. Now studying history and politics at the University of Hull, Dillon has seen himself go from a curiosity at local branch meetings, where he was always the youngest person in the room, to being part of a passionate, lively movement. "We knocked on doors and campaigned so hard in 2014, that we achieved our first Labour councillor in Craven District Council in 20 years, he says, proudly. "I was at the count and it was a fantastic night. It put that flame, that spark of hope that you can change things." Dillon, whose dad works as an immigration officer and whose mum is a domestic cleaner, travelled to the Queen Elizabeth II Conference Centre in central London to see Corbyn elected Labour leader in 2015. "I have always consistently supported him. He shows us you can believe in socialism, and austerity isn't the answer," he says. "I've never doubted him. He is especially keen on Corbyn's authenticity, and believes a lot of his treatment in the press has been disingenuous and misinterpreted. That said, if the Daily Mail isn't hating on Jeremy or the Labour leader, something is going very wrong, because he is standing up against the vested interests of the likes of the Barclay brothers, the owners of the Telegraph Group. They don't want to see the social change that Labour will deliver. The charges of anti-Semitism within the party have been upsetting," he says. "We have a proud tradition of solidarity and standing up to racism, and there is no room for anti-Semitism. It is essential that the party are actively rooting out and expelling those individuals," but he finds it a disgrace that nothing at all has happened about the Tories' Islamophobia. Will he be pushing for a people's vote on Brexit? "I'm not in favour of a second referendum," he says. "I voted Remain, but I respect the democratic wishes of the British people. Plus the problem is how the Electoral Commission would struggle to support a three-vote question, choosing between the PM's negotiated Brexit deal, staying in the EU, or leaving with no deal. How would that even look?" Jawad Khan, 20, Manchester. Jawad Khan is keen to see how the question of a second referendum will play out at party conference. Khan has already worked on 2 general election campaigns, stood for election as a local councillor representing his home ward in Kirklees, and spent 9 months in Brussels working on education policy with trade unions across Europe. The late MP Jo Cox was his mentor. "She was really welcoming and invited me to a campaign session to learn the ropes and encouraged me to get involved with the trade union movement," he says. Khan chats to me over the phone from his bedroom in Manchester, where he is studying politics and modern history. He grew up in Liversedge, West Yorkshire, on the same street just 2 doors down from where his mum, a teaching assistant, was born. "My family have always voted Labour, but they weren't massively involved." Khan is a GMB trade union rep, a communications officer and an activist for Batley Labour. For him, like many of his peers, Corbyn is a breath of fresh air because he's shown the country that it doesn't have to be the way it is. Khan believes wholeheartedly in Corbyn's politics. He has bold economic policies, he has made a different political environment, and he listens to people. See him in PMQs when he asks questions people have raised with him, but, he says, "I'm not uncritical." When he was struggling in the polls, lots of us were concerned about how he would do in a general election, but he barely put a foot wrong in that 2017 campaign. "What about the referendum? I campaigned for Remain. I wouldn't say Corbyn was massively responsible for its failure, rather than the wider campaign itself, which didn't adequately address people's concerns about the EU. Khan is keen to see how the question of a second referendum will play out at party conference. "I'm a trade unionist and our line is that a final Brexit deal should be put to the public. He plays down the divisions within the party that are blamed on Corbyn. As for momentum, he is impressed but hasn't joined. They're doing a good job of mobilizing and creating a mass movement. Their events, such as taking a festival approach at a traditional party conference, are a really good thing. Khan wants his party to keep making a difference to working people's lives. So, what now? Focus on taking the Tories to task on a daily basis. Believe in the vision Corbyn puts forward for Britain. Miriam Merwich, 25, London. Miriam Merwich, Sadiq Khan is a fantastic example of how to rebuild the trust with a Jewish community. Photograph, Andy Hall for The Observer. Growing up as a Tumblr teen, many of the theories that shaped Merwich's ideas on race, feminism and class came from essays and memes shared on an idiosyncratic corner of the internet. She is articulate, thoughtful and passionate as the chair of London Young Labour and a proud Jewish socialist. "I'm not a Corbynite," she says, near apologetic. "I'm illiterate. I don't believe in factions. I didn't back Corbyn originally because I thought he lacked credibility and was on a different page to where the public was." She laughs. "I'm proud to have been proved wrong. Jeremy speaks really well and he's straight talking. Politically, I agree with his policies and so much of what he says on the 2017 general election proved people really believed in his vision. What initially put her off? Everything I was reading. The headlines, what people were saying about us being out of government for 1,000 years. Merwich joined the Labour Party at 16, after the coalition government came in, angry and frustrated at increases in tuition fees and cuts to the education maintenance allowance. Born in West London to a midwife and postman, now both retired, she went to the London School of Economics to read social policy and promptly got involved in student activism. "I really enjoyed it. It changed my view of how we can organize and campaign. Knocking on people's doors and seeing how you could change people's minds was really inspiring." What has she made of the party's anti-Semitism crisis? "I don't think Corbyn handled it wrongly," she says, "but things could have been dealt with quicker. It's always been an issue, but it is a positive that people are talking about it and seem to care in a way they didn't when Ken Livingstone repeatedly made his comments." Sadiq Khan, she thinks, is a fantastic example of how to rebuild the trust with a Jewish community. For Merwich, the future is undoubtedly a socialist, Corbyn-led Labour. "It's difficult as a young person in Britain today to be a Tory," she says. "You look at the housing market, we see the degradation of all our services, the effects of cuts. How can you support a leader like Theresa May or Boris Johnson running around being so awful unless you come from huge privilege?" Tessa Milligan, 20, Hemel Hempstead. Tessa Milligan, "It upsets me that John McDonnell said Labour will push ahead with Brexit." Milligan is furious with the Labour leadership. The acting student and activist joined the party when she was in sixth form, initially inspired by Corbyn. "The default laziness was that I knew I would always vote Labour," she says. Milligan stops to explain that she comes from a long line of lefties. Both her parents, who met in communist Prague, work for trade unions, and both of her late grandfathers were former trade union general secretaries. "I didn't think I needed to join Labour as a member, but actually, when Jeremy became leader, I felt really represented. The ideas he was talking about, like his view on using quantitative easing to fund public services, on nationalizing the railways, they were economically transformative. But yes, I am disillusioned now," she says, sighing. "I don't feel represented anymore. Brexit," she says, "has changed everything. It upsets me that John McDonnell just this week said Labour will push ahead with Brexit." 8 out of 10 Labour Party members want to give the public a final say on Brexit. "I voted for a government that I thought would protect my rights, protect workers' rights, protect minorities. If a public vote for a deal is off the table, what message does that send to young voters? Or to the 80% of members who want a final say?" What does it say to the people on the left who voted for this Labour leadership, who wanted progressive, radical, innovative politics? Miliband says her friends from home often tell her to shut up when she talks about Brexit, but notes, even they've started talking about it when they found out Wetherspoons weren't going to sell Jägermeister anymore. To her it's clear that Corbyn and McDonnell need to stop looking back at the EU as it was perceived in the Tony Benn years as a club for fat cats. They need to realize the Labour movement has made the EU work for us. We have turned it round and made it the bedrock of rights that no UK government can overturn on its own. Ellen Cobb. 24, West Midlands. Ellen Cobb. Anyone who thinks the Labour Party as a whole is anti-Semitic or that Jeremy is racist, it's unfounded. Little seemed more difficult to Cobb than getting her dissertation done. But as she worked in the university library through the night of the 2015 general election, something snapped. I felt so frustrated watching the live coverage and knew I wanted to make a difference there and then. She joined the Labour Party. I literally had to Google how to do it, and has since become an active member of Young Labour in Stourbridge, in the West Midlands, galvanised in large part by Corbyn. I've met him a few times and he is so supportive. He came door knocking with us a few months ago in our constituency and he's just so easy to talk to, so easy to approach. I think he's a fantastic leader, she says. I can only thank him for everything he's done. The atmosphere in our local party is amazing and there has been a huge increase in membership because he inspires a lot of people. Has her support for Corbyn ever wavered? No, not at all. He's human. Look at him and his politics and what he says. Anyone who thinks the Labour Party as a whole is anti-Semitic or that Jeremy is racist, she pauses, exasperated. It's unfounded. Cobb has made many new friends since she became politically active. I didn't know much before, she admits, but I'm also a Momentum member now as well and their meetings are really informative and you get a range of people from throughout the borough. Some 15 to 20 members get together every month and Cobb has become a campaigner on everything from animal welfare to school cuts. We had a lot of interest leafleting outside different schools, she says. We put together numbers on all the funding cuts affecting individual schools and a lot of concerned parents got in touch. For her, the future of the party lies in grassroots activism because it engages local communities. Issues like homelessness, which is huge, need to be addressed by government but bias on the ground, too. As for the party's near future, Cobb is certain, I can see Jeremy becoming the next Prime Minister. Additional reporting by Lindsay Riley.